It's Homebrew coming at ya, and happy Homebrew Wednesday. We are going to be making a mead today, and this is going to be based very loosely off of one that was made by Emilatius. Those of you that remember him, you have to go back quite a few years for that. This one is not going to be exactly like his. He used cherry blossom honey, which came from Whidbey Island, just up the way here in Oregon from me. We will be using, because we can't get that anymore, tropical blossom honey. I'm also going to do something different with yeast. I'm going to go with White Lab's WLP. The reason we're doing this is because I want to have plenty of sweetness left, and I don't want to have to back sweeten. So we're going to see how that goes. Now, we're going to also do a few other things. So what we'll be having here is dried cherries, dried cranberries, and raisins. Now, historically, those three dried ingredients were used as like yeast nutrients at one point in history when we talk about mead making. So we're going to put that in, but I'm really using it because truly Emilatius's mead was probably one of the best homemade or commercial meads I've ever had. I am missing one ingredient, just so you know. He does also use hibiscus flowers. So we're not going to have the hibiscus. That really just mostly adds coloring. It does add just a slight flavor. I've had some things he's made with the hibiscus, but it's really that fruit quality that we want. So let's get going. I'll show you how we're going to do this today. Okay, I've got the honey sitting in a sink full of warm water, I should say pretty hot water. We want to make that easy as far as diluting later. Over here for our yeast starter, we've got 1 quart, not a liter, but a quart, because I have to measure how much water I'm using so I can make a 3-gallon batch. We're going to go ahead and start with about a little over 1/8 of a teaspoon of wine yeast starter, and some K-Firm, also called Firm K. It's about just shy of a ½ teaspoon. Really the recipe is to do 1 gram per gallon. And then about a heaping 1/4 teaspoon of Go-Firm. We're going to give that a little bit of a swirl to get that diluting in. The Go-Firm has to be encouraged. A lot of time you really want to just put that in straight hot water to start. And now I'm going to give it some honey to munch on. I used the sink full of hot water to place the flask in and then just kind of swirl it around till it diluted the honey. Now we're going to check the temperature. It's a little on the warm side, so we're going to let this cool down before we actually pitch the yeast. Alright, we've got this down to about 74 degrees. Actually, as far as the fermentation go with wine, with the 002, we're looking at between 68 and 78 Fahrenheit, so at 74, we're in a good zone. We're going to go ahead and open this up. This has all been sanitized, including the scissors. So now that that's all going, we've got a nice vortex. We're going to let this go for a couple hours, and then we'll start on the other side, and I'll meet you back there. Okay, our yeast starter's been going for several hours now, so that's in good shape. We're going to move back over then to making this mead. And so what we've done, I've heated this up just a little over 175. It's about 178. And we're going to go ahead and add in a few things. So I've got over here 3 quarts. So if you take the quart I've got there and the 3 here, we're up to 1 gallon. We've got 2 gallons left to get to our 3-gallon batch size. First, I have 1.5 pounds of raisins. We'll get those in. I'm going to stir them a little bit just to make sure they're not going to stick to the bottom of the pan. Now we've got 1.5 pounds of cranberries. Oh, these smell so good. Just picked them up all today. And finally, I've got 1.5 pounds of dried cherries, but one of them is not going to make it in there. Oh, that's so good. We're going to bring this back up to about 175. Our primary goal here is to kill off any bacteria that might be on any of these dried fruits, and also kill off any yeast that might be on there, any wild yeast. And once we get it up to roughly 175, we're going to go ahead, I'll keep stirring, but we're going to let this stew for about 15-20 minutes. I'm going to go with 20 minutes. I'm going to add in a teaspoon more of yeast nutrient. And one more necessary ingredient is pectin enzyme, because we have fruits. So here's the first, we're using about 3/4 of a teaspoon per gallon. So that's a total of 2¼ teaspoons of pectin enzyme. I'll give all of that a stir. Now that those ingredients are in there, we're going to go ahead and finish up our 20 minutes at 175. In retrospect, smelling this, I should have probably just blanched the dried fruits in boiling water. Just done a quick blanch. I could still use that if I wanted, and then boiled the water. And because stewing it's going to give me more of a stewed fruit taste, as opposed to how the dried fruits taste right at that moment as you're eating it. Blanching it would have been enough to kill off any yeast or bacteria. So a note, if you try to do this yourself, we'll see how it turns out. And while the timer is counting down, we're going to enjoy some peach mead that I made previously. Take a look at the clarity on that. Is that not beautiful? That's just, here I am behind it now. Look at that. That's one clear peach mead. This has been very enjoyable. Oh, I do like that. I only have one bottle left, so I'm desperate to make some more mead of, in fact, I'm out of all my meads except that one additional bottle. So I'll be making a few meads this year. All right, we'll be back soon. Timer's about to go off here, right on cue. So that's done. We'll go ahead and turn this off, and we're almost essentially done here. We've got our yeast starter going. I've got 7½ pounds of honey. I normally go with a ratio of 3:1. That's 3 pounds of honey to 1 gallon of water. Today we're going to change that up a little bit. I'm going to go with 7½ pounds of honey. So that's 2½ pounds of honey per gallon. I want a slightly lighter fill on the mead. I've got my oven mitts, and we're going to go ahead and get this poured into a fermentation bucket that I have below. One thing that I'll note is that I do have a thermal well, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So what we want to do now is we need to cool this down, because this was at 175 for a good period of time. We need to get it back down. We don't want to introduce our honey at too high of a temperature. Our ideal range would be maybe about 110. That's enough to help kind of liquefy it a little bit further, but not to lose all those subtle aromas and flavors that we're going to find in our wonderful tropical blossom honey. We don't want to lose that. We want to carry all of that across into our mead. So we're going to go ahead and add some cold water. We did our math, I think I said earlier. We used a gallon so far. We'll use another 1/4 gallon to rinse out the honey bowl, and then that leaves us 1 3/4 gallons. So we'll start adding that in, try to get the temperature right, and all the water is going through a filter. So we've got our sanitized spoon here. I'm going to mix this up a little bit. Okay, we're at 120 degrees. Actually, it's dropping back down a little. About 117. That's not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and measure out some more of the water I need and pour just a little bit in to get it to our 110. And finally, I've got my 1 quart of hot water. I'll go ahead and put in here now. And I'll use a sanitized spoon to kind of swish that around and clean off the sides. and we'll add that to it. That'll give us the 3 gallons that we want. The thermal well that you saw on the lid for the fermentation bucket, that's because I have a fermentation chamber. Basically, I keep it at cool temperatures. I vary it between times of the year. I'm going to have that temperature probably set to about 50 degrees. And then I'm going to use a heating belt or whatever. I have a sheet that goes around it that will heat it up. I also put a blanket around my bucket so it holds in the heat so that we can keep it and maintain it at about 74 degrees for that. I also will probably go ahead and run it to that because I've got fruit in here I need to be aware of for about 2 weeks. You want to generally do on the very low end 1 week, but usually 1.5 to 3 weeks is what you'll do it the first time, and then generally speaking at that point you're going to siphon that off into another container. I like to do that multiple times throughout the process. The longer you leave it on yeast and the dying yeast, you will create off flavors, and we don't want to have any of that in our mead. We want a nice, delicate, beautiful, sweet mead with those different dried fruit flavors in there, along with a little bit of that character that we get from the tropical blossom honey, right? So we want to get all that character into there. I will probably let this go. A lot of people go much, much longer. I can't ever wait to get into it, so I'll probably go more like the 9, possibly 10-month range before we bottle up. All right, I've set the Inkbird for 74 degrees, and it's going to try to maintain it within 1 degree on either side. Alarm will go off at 2 degrees on either side. You can see that we're actually at 74.4 degrees, which is pretty good with our goal of 74. So we're going to just let that baby sit for a couple of weeks. You can be sure that I will definitely come back when it's done and do a tasting of our dried fruit mead. You have a great week. I'll catch up with you again, either making some mead or beer, whatever it might be, and possibly a beer review or mead review. Cheers.